Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. You'll find this very interesting on how to reflash your firmware with the DJI Osmo Action. We're going to load firmware 99.99.99.99. We're going to show you what we have on our camera right now. Go to the gear, all the way to About. Firmware version 01.09.00.107211. Always have a full battery. Make sure the camera is off. Take the SD card that you already put in firmware 99.99.99.99 into the camera manually. This is going to take 2 seconds. As the camera turns on, updating approximate 2 minutes. Update successful. Click on the screen, scroll down, go to gear, to the About, and look at the About. You are on firmware 54.48.254.437211. This is a refresh firmware. You're still on version 01.09.00.10, even though it says firmware 54.48.254.437211. Now, we're going to shut our camera off. This is going to be a little tricky. I may skip a step, but I will show you with one of these firmwares that I can put in an older firmware. Firmware 1.04.00.10. That's the one I chose to put into the camera. Now, back in the days, the hyperlapse wasn't available, and you're not going to see hyperlapse disappear. So let's turn on the camera. Let's revert back to an old firmware. We're all done, just like that, 2 seconds. Let's swipe down. Let's look at the firmware that's on the camera in the About. Firmware 01.04.00.107211. Now, if I go into the camera and I go to the gear, I know I get it back spaced out, and I look at quick switch. You have your video, HDR, slow-mo, time-lapse, hyperlapse, loop recording, photo, burst, AEB, and timed. Now, back in the days when you formatted or connected, the little blue light was in version 01.02.00.10, and I can look at that at a later time. So what I am going to do is I am going to place back in my firmware 01.09.00.10. All I do is grab the firmware, put it on the card, put it to the camera, turn the camera on, allow the camera to update. Now I'm going to tell you exactly how to do that. You're going to say, how can I do that, Fish? I've been trying every single time to get that. Well, the key here is you need to rename the file firmware fw99.99.99.99. What will that do in the actual change of firmware? Absolutely nothing. Why? Because all it's doing is changing the name of the firmware version and nothing more. It's not removing the quick snap hyperlapse that was not available in firmware 1.02.00.10. Imagine that. I want to thank you very much for stopping by, and I appreciate your time. I hope this gives me a thumbs up, a like, and have a great day. As clear as day, I'm on firmware 01.02.00.107211. New firmware available. Loading up. Hit download. Recheck camera. Proof is in the pudding.